As a longtime Assassin's Creed fan, something I've often thought about, especially whenever I replay Assassin's Creed Rogue, is what if Shay Patrick Cormac never betrayed the Assassins? What if after what happened in Lisbon, he and Achilles cooled off and discussed what happened like mature adults? This is such a major turning point for not only the story of Rogue, but even AC3 and Unity as well. Shay's betrayal of the Assassin's Creed set off a domino effect that would impact countless others and directly affect two of the other series protagonists, Connor and Arno. While obviously Shay's betrayal is set in stone and can't be undone, I always found these what-if scenarios to be really fun to discuss, like how Marvel made an entire series around the idea. So I figured, why not kind of do the same thing for Assassin's Creed? And I think Shay choosing to stay with the Brotherhood is perhaps one of, if not the biggest what-if scenario of the entire series. It's so fascinating to think about just how many people and stories were impacted by this heat-of-the-moment betrayal by Shay, and how different it all could have shaped out if it didn't happen. But before we go down the rabbit hole of all these crazy changes and butterfly effects, let's start with the simple stuff. So, if Shay never betrays the Brotherhood, he obviously never attempts to steal the manuscript, and in turn is never shot by Chevalier. If the assassins retained the manuscript, they could have very easily continued their discoveries of the different precursor sites around the globe, and what happened in Lisbon may have happened again in other major cities. Achilles seemed to believe that Shay must have messed up or done something wrong to cause the earthquake in Lisbon, and so he would have continued trying to claim the artifacts, and might have ended up doing way more harm than good. But then again, at the same time, if Shay was still with the assassins, he may have persisted to warn Achilles of the dangers of removing these artifacts from the precursor sites, and Achilles may have eventually listened. After all, at the end of Rogue, Achilles realizes Shay was right and decides to not remove the artifact. Why did he suddenly decide to listen to Shay? We're not really sure, but it stands to reason that if he could eventually heed Shay's warning, even when he was an enemy, then the same thing could have happened were Shay still an assassin. Or Achilles would have made the same mistake as Shay in Lisbon and have to learn the hard way what the dangers of trying to retrieve the pieces of Eden will bring. So Shay's betrayal may have saved plenty of innocent lives if Achilles still chose to ignore Shay even when he was still an assassin. I guess it's impossible to know for sure, but we know Achilles can be a little hard-headed and stubborn sometimes, so I wouldn't be surprised if he still refused to listen to Shay, even if he didn't betray them. All that aside though, Shay remaining with the Brotherhood would also have severely changed the power struggle between the Assassins and Templars. Shay's defection to the Templar Order gave them a huge advantage in their war with the Assassins in the colonies. Not only did he provide the Templars with the manuscript and vital information about the precursor sites, but he also killed many of the higher-ranking, experienced assassins. Kasegawase, Chevalier, Hope, Adewale, even Liam probably all would have survived if not for Shay's betrayal. The Colonial Brotherhood would have had far more strength and numbers to fight the Templars, especially with Shay still on their side, and I highly doubt they would lose control to Haytham's Templars in that scenario. I don't think Haytham is able to establish such a strong Templar presence with nearly no assassin resistance in the colonies if not for Shay. I mean, who wouldn't want the guy that makes his own luck on their side?
I make my own luck.
And obviously, if the Assassins don't lose a lot of their key members and aren't defeated by the Templars, then Achilles isn't forced to go into exile and essentially quit being an assassin for a couple decades. Then again, Shay is the one who convinced Haytham to spare Achilles in the first place, so who knows if Achilles would even survive if not for Shay's betrayal. But I feel like this whole scene at the end probably wouldn't even happen, since the Templars would be far weaker than the Assassins if Shay was still with them. Instead, I think it's likely that the Colonial Brotherhood only grows stronger, with Achilles having a creed full of some of the deadliest characters in the entire series, and that especially includes Shay, which would then obviously completely change the circumstances of Assassin's Creed 3 and the story for both Connor and Haytham Kenway. Now, the beginning sequences of AC3 are still before the events of AC Rogue. Haytham still meets Connor's mother and everything, even if Shay never defected, which means Connor would still be born, but a lot about his story would change. His village would still probably be burned down, and he'd still likely leave to seek out the assassins, only this time, instead of finding a lonely, old, crippled Achilles, he'd be walking in on a fully functioning brotherhood. One that includes Shay. Now wouldn't that be something? Imagine if Shay trained and mentored Connor. He could teach him the power of making your own luck, making Connor even more unstoppable than he already is.
I make my own luck.
Where are you, Charles?
This would also change the Templar presence in AC3. While I'm sure the Templars would still have a small presence in the colonies, there's no way they'd grow as strong as they did if Achilles and his brotherhood is still running and fully operational, which would completely change the events and story of Assassin's Creed 3. I mean, realistically, if Shay doesn't betray the assassins, there probably isn't much of a story to be told in AC3. There's so many other variables and events that happen in AC3 that could change too. Maybe Connor isn't forced to kill Haytham. Maybe he gets Lee way sooner. Maybe he never even meets Charles Lee to begin with. It's just impossible to know every little thing that would change, but it would certainly be very, very different. Who knows, maybe a non-crippled Achilles decides to retire and appoints Shay as his successor. Or Liam becomes mentor with Shay next in line. I mean, I would kill to see a Shay and Connor interaction. For two characters that never canonically met, there would be a lot of intrigue and context to that interaction. What if Shay and Connor fought Haytham? God, that would be so cool. I'm driving myself crazy with the possibilities. But obviously, Connor and AC3's story wouldn't be the only other game affected by Shay choosing to stay with the assassins. It would also heavily affect Arno and the story of AC Unity. Shay obviously killed Arno's father, Charles Dorian, to retrieve the precursor box for the Templars. Shay basically spent the rest of his life after Rogue searching for it, and if not for Shay's betrayal, Arno's father lived, and the assassins keep the precursor box in their possession. Now, Arno's father very possibly still could have died at some point, being an assassin and all, but it would have happened at a later date, if at all, meaning Arno wouldn't be orphaned and adopted by the De La Serres, where he'd grow up with Elise. He still very possibly could have joined the assassins to follow in his father's footsteps, rather than to redeem himself and avenge De La Serre. It's not like we know if Charles wanted his son to become an assassin like him, but if Arno is never taken in by the De La Serres, Francois De La Serre may have lived. Arno wouldn't have been the one delivering that letter warning De La Serre of the impending danger, and he might have been better prepared for it. Now, similar to Arno's father, De La Serre could have still possibly been killed. Germain seemed rather intent on that, and could have devised another way to have him killed, but if De La Serre lives, then the truce between the assassins and Templars in France sticks, and there's real continuous peace for one of the rare times in the history of both orders. Elise and Arno don't seek revenge. Them not growing up together likely affects that relationship as well, and I doubt Elise dies at the end of Unity trying to kill Germain. It's possible Pierre Bellic still could have tried to purge the Assassin Council, as we know he had a strong disdain for the treaty between the Assassins and Templars, but all in all, so much would be different. Both the American and French Revolution would likely be very heavily changed, as the Assassins and Templars both played massive roles in those events, and a change in the power struggle could have led to a different outcome. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, if Shay didn't betray the assassins, we'd have world peace.
I make my own luck.
I'm kidding, but it's actually crazy to think how much this decision by Shay would shape out so many different events across 3 entirely different games, and start a ripple effect that would change not only the history of both the Assassins and Templars, but very possibly the history of the American and French Revolutions, along with potentially even the 7 Years' War. Imagine if someone had just talked to Shay, or calmed him down before he decided to steal the manuscript. script, or if he had taken a little more time to cool down and have a more civilized conversation with Achilles. If Ubisoft ever does decide to do any kind of what-if scenarios for Assassin's Creed, whether it's like an animated series or something else, this would absolutely have to be one of the first ones they do. It's arguably one of the most important events in all of Assassin's Creed history. It's comparable to what if Anakin never fell to the dark side and betrayed the Jedi in Star Wars. Not that Shay is Anakin in the situation, because he did have some justification for what he did, but just in terms of the sheer scale and weight this one event had. I'm curious what you guys think though. What do you think would have happened if Shay never betrayed the Assassins? And are there any other what ifs in the series you'd be curious to see? As always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and considered subscribing to the channel if you're new. A special thank you to my members for supporting me, and other than that, thanks for watching, and go make your own luck out there, Assassins.
I make my own.